Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here.
Hello.
The highly anticipated third Inter-Korean Summit will take place from today until September 18th. It's hoped this meeting will be a watershed moment that brings the two Koreas closer on the path towards lasting peace. And with North Korea's nuclear issue currently stuck in neutral gear, the world is watching the event closely to see if it can yield a breakthrough in the ongoing negotiations. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to suss out the various agenda items likely to be tabled at the third Inter-Korean Summit and what that would imply. Now, I'm sure being in Korea at this time when there's so many unprecedented events unfolding is quite a special moment. So how do you feel about being in Korea during such a pivotal time?
But actually, I'm quite excited. On the one hand, the media hype compared to the previous Inter-Korean summits has died down a little bit. It's not as crazy anymore. But I have the feeling that what we've witnessed before at the summits was more like the foreplay, like the symbolic thing, and now it gets to the substance. So actually, I'm quite excited about covering that.
Okay, so once again, third summit this year alone. How do you feel about it?
Third summit in the barely 6 months, but actually, as Fabian pointed out, I think it might be interesting to see that we might get something fleshed out this time, real content, an agreement, for example, maybe in the regards of the military security around the border. I think now things are getting a little bit more serious between the Koreas, and it's time also maybe for President Moon to make a more of a bold movement in this third encounter.
All right, and Fred, you've been in Korea for longer than a decade, so has there been a time during your post, such as now, where we're seeing one major inter-Korean relations event after another in such quick succession?
No, I mean, that's clearly unprecedented. As Andres said, that's three summits in less than 6 months.
Sure.
And what I find really interesting, and it shows how the stakes, how high they are. And what I find really interesting was the second meeting, the second summit were organized like this in less than 24 hours. That was really interesting, and we really think changing. Something is happening. Then, as you guys said, now we will enter the substance, and we have to see what will come out of this summit. But to be here and to cover it is, of course, really interesting. Yeah.
All right, now if we zoom out a little and take a look at the two previous Inter-Korean summits held earlier this year, the historic first Inter-Korean summit was held on April 27th on the southern side of Panmunjom. Followed by another on May 26th, this time on the northern side of Panmunjom. The first Inter-Korean summit in particular yielded several impressive scenes, including the two leaders enjoying private discussions while walking over a bridge on the border. What memorable moments might we be able to see during this time around?
Well, I'm very sure that we will be witnessing some very memorable moments. The distance between actually Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, they seem to be doing something that is really more close. They were recorded having a conversation, having tea. Whereas if you might remember Kim Jong-il and Kim Dae-jung or President No, were seen in sitting in tables at a very long distance. They were seen walking together, but there was a little bit more of an official feeling, of a colder feeling to it. I'm pretty much sure that this time Kim Jong-un is trying to convey the idea that both Koreas are really getting closer this time.
All right.
The images of the first summit in Panmunjom, the optics were so strong. I think that will be very difficult to beat that. And I think it's a good thing, because I think it's time now to go to see past the optics and the good images and really the substance. What can you decide? What can we agree on?
Well, I will pay very close attention on how Moon Jae-in reacts in Pyongyang, because it's a very slippery ground. He's basically leaving his comfort zone. It's basically the North Korean side that's creating the images. I think some critics will point out there's a fear that this could be a huge propaganda show or whatever. So actually, Moon Jae-in has to be careful also for his domestic audience, like to be very polite, maybe produce some historic gestures, but also not like seeming like submissive or like playing the propaganda game of the North Koreans. So it's really a fine line, actually.
Right, because it is being held in Pyongyang. So the main points of discussion for the summit in the first round, the key points as outlined in the April 27th Panmunjom Declaration included achieving denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and creating a framework of peace. What are the main points likely to be discussed this time around, do you think?
Well, of course, all eyes are set right now in trying to break the deadlock between DPRK and the US. But let's not forget that actually this is an inter-Korean summit. And as the South Korean government has pointed out, inter-Korean relations go separate. They're not intended to be a byproduct of US-DPRK relations. I expect, as I said, probably military, some kind of agreement regarding lowering tensions, which is, I think, actually pretty significant for what it will mean to start fleshing out peace in the peninsula.
And I'm sure denuclearization and the peace treaty, a formal declaration to end the Korean War, will also be one of the main points of discussion. These 2 points, denuclearization and a formal peace treaty, do you think they can go hand in hand, or do you think one should come before the other?
I mean, I don't see why they couldn't come hand in hand. It seems to be very important for North Korea. So I don't see why we shouldn't make such a big deal out of it if North Korea wants to sign a peace treaty. And if that can help with the denuclearization process, I think we should sign it as soon as possible.
This war has to be ended, but I think if it's only a piece of paper, then it's worthless. I think what North Korea wants is like basically a treaty that they don't get attacked, like a security guarantee, a function that now the nuclear program has. So, and if that can be replaced by something else, then they wouldn't have a reason to keep their nuclear bombs.
But no reason to why those two can't go hand in hand.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I think that should totally go hand in hand.
Okay, so if we just focus on the denuclearization aspect, earlier this month, when South Korea's National Security Advisor Jung Eui-yong was dispatched to Pyongyang as a special envoy, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made a promise to achieve denuclearization by the end of US President Donald Trump's first term in office.
트럼프 대통령의 첫 임기 내에 북한과 미국 간의 그 70년간의 그 적대 역사를 청산하고 북미 관계를 개선해 나가면서 비핵화를 실현했으면 좋겠다.
Do you think denuclearization by then, a bit over 2 years from now, is feasible? Do you think it can indeed happen by then?
I think it can happen. Many things can happen. I think right now the problem is we're not seeing any concrete measures taken. It all got started from summits, leaders meeting each other. We haven't had any technical work performed before. Denuclearization is a very complex and technical procedure. So, in my opinion, if actually we start seeing a little bit of a better dynamic in the action for action kind of thing that is trying to be implemented now, we actually might see a little bit more of a better flow in denuclearization process in the coming months. But I think that in that regard, this summit and the upcoming summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un will be very important, of course.
Fred, what's your opinion? Do you think it can happen within the next 2 years?
I think that the problem is technically, in terms of resources, in terms of inspectors you have to send, in terms of visits you have to do. I think it's almost impossible to do it in 2 years. I mean, when you look at Iran, how much time it took, and the Iran program is not as developed as the North Korean one, and you see how it stretched the US resources. Even for the Iran program, I think for North Korea, it seems very, very difficult. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I mean, I think we can do very important breakthrough in 2 years. But a full, total, irreversible denuclearization in 2 years, that seems very difficult. Right. But if that's the target, that's the aim, let's aim for it, of course.
I think that's the expert consensus as well, that 2 years is sufficient time to dismantle the key nuclear facilities. Some say around 20% of the facilities. 2 years is much too short for the complete denuclearization. So what might be the reasons behind Kim Jong-un making a seemingly unrealistic pledge. What did he have to gain by making such a bold statement?
I mean, Trump was basically on the edge of getting back to the rhetoric of, fire and fury. The peace process, the denuclearization process stalled. There was no progress made, and people were getting impatient. And I think Kim Jong-un felt that. But on the other hand, that being said, Trump is also invested in making that denuclearization process look like a success. He doesn't want to have another problem right now at a moment where in domestic policies he has so many problems already and so many crises, and so I think he wants to have at least some success that he can show, but also Trump is basically on the same page that he doesn't want to rock the boat.
And I think as well, we saw that at the last military parade in Pyongyang for the 70th anniversary of the regime. We saw that the focus this time was not too much on the military, but on the economic development. And I think this shift is really interesting. And I generally think that Kim Jong-un wants to improve the economy and is ready to make some important concession on the denuclearization front. And he needs, to develop his economy, he needs at least a partial lifting of sanctions. He needs foreign resources, he needs foreign help. So I think he really wants to reach an agreement, and I think this is an opportunity we should not miss.
So Kim Jong-un wants to reach an agreement, but if we have a look at the international sort of sentiment, following the April Inter-Korean Summit and the June Pyongyang-Washington Summit earlier this year, North Korea has carried out several measures to demonstrate their commitments to denuclearize, such as dismantling its nuclear and missile testing sites.
풍계리는 갱도의 3분의 2가 완전히 북락해서 핵실험이 영구적으로 불가능하게 됐다. 매우 실질적이고 의미 있는 조치들인데 이러한 조치들에 대한 국제사회의 평가가 좀 인색한 데 대한 그 어려움을 토로했습니다.
However, the international community remained largely unconvinced. Why do you think this is the case, and what can Kim Jong-un do to convincingly demonstrate his sincerity?
Well, I think there's a lack of trust still. I mean, nobody has ever set foot on Punggye-ri. They don't really know what was in there, how sophisticated it is, and if you're supposed to have demolished these tunnels, how long would it take to build another similar facility? And the same thing with Tongchang-ri, with the Sohae launching station. A test stand is something not that sophisticated that you cannot rebuild in 2 days. So I think the problem is you need to have people on the ground. North Korea should start gesturing towards that, having inspections on ground, making catalogs of what they have in stock, that kind of thing, right?
It's good you mentioned Punggye-ri because it's interesting. When they destroy the site, they invited only journalists, foreign correspondents like us, but not experts. We are not experts. We don't know. We cannot really interpret or analyze what we see, and I think initially they said they will accept nuclear inspectors, and they did not do it. So this kind of attitude, you see that I think that's why there is a bit of the foreign international community.
Right, why there's still
doubts.
some suspicion.
Yeah.
But also shutting down test sites, that's only the first step. That's actually not really part of denuclearization, it's part of freezing their nuclear program. And I think one step that North Korea could do is actually first declare maybe not all of their nuclear weapons, but a large share of their nuclear arsenal. And once you declare those weapons, then the next step could follow, inspection, and at the very end, dismantling them.
Okay. In a recent interview with a local newspaper, President Moon Jae-in pledged to make, quote, irreversible progress towards denuclearization and peace on the Korean Peninsula, demonstrating his willingness to bring about a formal end to the Korean War before the end of this year. Do you think a formal peace treaty will have real, tangible effects in terms of preventing further conflict, or do you think it's merely a symbolic gesture?
You're right. I think it's a symbol, and in international relations, symbols are very important. So in that sense, I think it's very important. One of the reasons why North Korea is considered as a threat is because they have this very, very aggressive rhetoric, you know. They always threaten to bomb their neighbors, to attack the US. The symbols are important. If you sign a peace treaty, if you tone down that rhetoric, I think that will have an impact, that will make cooperation with North Korea much easier. And then when you express that you want peaceful intention, that has an impact, of course.
So it's symbolic but important nonetheless.
Exactly, yes.
All right, let's shift gears now and take a look at the ramifications of the third Inter-Korean Summit on the regional powers. Following the South Korean special envoy's visit to the north, US President Donald Trump has maintained a warm stance on restarting dialogue between Washington and Pyongyang.
Massive sanctions. I want to take them off quickly, but they've got to get rid of the nukes. They've got to get rid of the nukes.
Trump expressed great satisfaction over a personal letter he received from Kim Jong-un, the fourth of its kind. And on September 10th, he revealed that talks were underway at the White House to arrange a second North Korea-US summit.
The two leaders committed to maintaining strong sanctions on North Korea.
What are your thoughts on President Trump's warming tone with regards to North Korea? Is he being sincere?
Well, he's sincere in making a deal and making a success for him. Whether he's sincere in caring for the people on the Korean Peninsula, that's another story. I have hopes actually about that also the next US DPRK summit will be a success. The only problem I see is that with his leadership approach, he's so top down. He's basically doing a one-man show, and in the end, we've seen the problems that he's not connected to his bureaucracy. Basically, his staff is sometimes has to prevent him from doing mistakes. Sometimes he does promises to the North Korean side that he cannot keep. One media reported, for example, that he promised an end of the Korean War right after the summit in Singapore in June. And in the end, he basically couldn't keep his promise because the stance of the government is first you have to denuclearize.
Right.
Yeah.
I think actually if it wasn't for someone like Trump with this particular style, I don't think a summit like the one we saw in Singapore would have ever happened. So I think that in that regard, actually this particular very special style that Trump has is benefiting, at least for now.
Right.
Peace talks.
Definitely. I mean, Trump has an affinity for dictators. I don't want to judge that, but at least that's an opportunity. He's not turned off by North Korea. He wants to make a deal. For him, discussing with dictators is not something he's afraid of doing. It's an opportunity. Yeah. So let's take it and see what happens. Yeah.
Okay, so seize the opportunity. And the other regional powers, Russia, China, Japan, they are also zeroing in on the third Inter-Korean summit and the possible outcomes from that meeting. Each country and its leader might have different views and calculations regarding the latest summit depending on its national interests. So which countries do you think are most in favor of the third Inter-Korean summit actually taking place?
Well, I think obviously South and North Korea are strongly in favor of it. US very much as well, because they have seen what the two previous Inter-Korean summits can do to accelerate dialogue. And I think China has a very strong interest in this because they've had to deal for a very long time with an uncomfortable neighbor. Anything dealing with, the end of the Korean War regime, let's say a peace treaty and denuclearization, I think works out very, very well for Beijing. As in regards for example, other countries of the six-party talks club, for example, Japan, I'm not that sure that Japan is that willing, to put a close to all this. Most probably because they have their own issues with North Korea, the abduction issue, the threats in regards of security, and also, the Shinzo Abe administration loses a strong asset if they don't have the North Korean threat to pitch in elections. This is an increasingly lowly politicized country, Japan, so you really need that kind of asset, I think, in elections right now.
What about Russia, do you think?
It's good that you mentioned it. I mean, if you followed it, North Korea and Russia recently announced that they want to open a trade office in the very, very far east. I mean, Russia not only has a border to Europe, but also a very tiny border to North Korea. And nowadays, Russia has a very good relation to South Korea, but to North Korea, not so. It's very complicated, but I think they want to have stability, and I mean, it would be a huge game changer if, for example, Moon Jae-in would realize the Inter-Korean Railroad project, basically not only for passengers, not only for me, basically being able to visit my hometown from Seoul to Berlin, but also having oil pipelines and all kind of goods being transferred from South Korea to Europe. Yeah.
Now, if we have a look at the armistice that temporarily ended the Korean War, that was signed by the United States, representing the United Nations Command, China and North Korea. South Korea was not among the signatories. Is it in any way possible that we can sign this piece of paper without involvement from China, without their consent, without their participation in negotiations?
I think it's possible because, I mean, two treaties can sign peace if they want to sign peace. The priority for China is stability. So I really don't see why, unless maybe for like a bilateral relation problem with the US, I mean, but I don't see why they would not want to sign a peace treaty. It's completely in their interest. They want to stabilize the situation. They're tired of these neighbors always creating trouble at its border. They want to integrate North Korean economy to the world economy. They have the hope that somehow North Korea will follow their own path under Deng Xiaoping. So I don't see why they wouldn't accept to sign a peace treaty.
So even if it's possible, it wouldn't be very smart, as you pointed out. I mean, China has to be somehow part of that process. Otherwise, I mean, it's not possible. In the region of East Asia, China is a very dominant part, and it will be even more dominant in the future. And also for North Korea, I think China can be also a security guarantee. If they are like committed and invested in North Korea, that's probably can be a win-win situation. And China made that clear actually with the recent military parade at North Korea's 70th birthday celebrations. China sent its third highest party official side on side next to Kim Jong-un. They want to be in control, and I think South Korea would be smart and kind of accept that. Yeah.
Okay, so here's what some media outlets said about that. Back in August, some media outlets said that China could take part in the negotiations to formally end the Korean War, to exert more influence in the denuclearization process, and possibly demand a withdrawal of US troops from South Korea. The US and China have recently been locked in a bitter dispute over several contentious issues, including trade. Do you think US and China could lock horns once again in disagreement over issues relating to denuclearization and a formal peace treaty?
Well, as you pointed out, there is maybe a point here of China actually demanding, if we have a peace treaty, what the real reason for American presence is here. But then again, I think the US and South Korea are very aware that this has to be a different thing. Peace treaty is a different issue. Our security alliance, for the time being, short-term, mid-term, should remain the same. And maybe that could actually mean that, they could lock horns as they're negotiating what the consequences of the peace treaty could be. But we never know.
Okay. So this is the last question for today. After the completion of this third Inter-Korean summit, what do you think will be the main issues of focus in terms of the inter-Korean relations and Pyongyang-Washington relations going forward?
I think for inter-Korean relations, obviously, South Korea wants to increase all its cooperation with the North. They want to increase especially the economic cooperation. I think they would like to reopen Kaesong. But the initial condition, the precondition is denuclearization, or at least some progress. So really, everything at the end of the day will end up on one question, like did we have enough progress on the denuclearization front?
Okay.
I think in the inter-Korean side, I think actually anything that is not sanction related, because as you pointed out, you need to have very concrete steps from North Korea in order to start lifting sanctions and increase cooperation. But all the kind of things that you can actually do to keep on building trust in the peninsula between both sides, things like human rights, for example, having people that are retained in North Korea back into South Korea, and the other way around. For example, the restaurant workers case, and similar, some defectors, some old war prisoners that are being kept here and are willing to go back to North Korea. Maybe some kind of agreement can be signed on that. That kind of agreement is very tangible, I think, and it contributes very much to building trust with two sides, right?
Or like the Olympic Games. Last week, the South Korean Minister of Sport said that Moon Jae-in would offer to Kim Jong-un to co-organize Olympic Games in 2032. That's interesting. This is a kind of project. Why not? I mean, this is a way to integrate North Korea into the international community, to encourage the country to open its border, to open itself. I think this is kind of project that South Korea should continue to try.
So more projects that two Koreas can work on together.
Yeah, and unless the sanctions are lifted, it's very difficult to continue the economic projects.
Okay. All right, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The slogan for the third Inter-Korean Summit is Peace, a New Future, reflecting on the common desire of the people to build a new future between South and North Korea. And it is hoped that this building can live up to its name and serve as a stepping stone for peace on the Korean Peninsula. That does it for this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents. Thank you for tuning in and goodbye.